Hi everyone, welcome along to the latest edition, thank you for joining us, the latest edition of My Racing Life. It's time to introduce our latest guest, a man who, as a trainer, was truly trailblazing, globetrotting, tasting top level success in places like the USA, Canada, Japan, Singapore, Dubai, all across Europe and certainly here in the UK. In October 2018, he brought down the curtain on a truly tremendous training career, glittering training career it was, to concentrate on the family-run Fittock Stud just outside of Newmarket. There is so much to talk about over the next hour or so with, of course, Luca Cumani. Luca, a very good afternoon to you. How do we find you?
Very well, couldn't be better. I live in a beautiful place just outside Newmarket, our stud, and the weather's glorious. We basically have isolated very well, and luckily none of us, or none of the people we know around us have caught the coronavirus, which is all the talk nowadays, and the disaster that's happening in the world in the last 3 months. But hopefully we're getting out of it, and the great news is that racing starts again on Monday.
Hear to that. It won't have gone unnoticed to many people, of course, at home that the wall behind you, Luca, is absolutely full of presumably some of your top-class performers over the decades. What we're going to be doing over the next hour is talking about a few of them. You've picked out the 7. Was it difficult to leave a few of them out, Luca?
Yes, very much so. I tried to pick the 7 that meant most to me and to my career. But there's plenty of others that could have featured, that were very good horses and helped fly the flag.
A lot of people will know your backstory, of course, and it was a training career that spanned over 4 decades. And as I said, it was only as recent as October 2018 that you turned in the licence. But just to refresh, when it came to horse racing in the absolute beginning for you, over in Italy, of course, through your mother and your father, your mother as a rider and your father as a trainer, horse racing was very much in the blood, wasn't it, Luca?
Oh, definitely. I was born with horse racing blood in my veins.
And when it came to, I was reading the other day about your move over to Newmarket, which came in the mid-1970s when you went to work for then Henry Cecil, of course, latterly Sir Henry Cecil. I read somewhere that you were completely enchanted by British racing. What was it that really captured the imagination about racing in Britain for you at that stage?
Well, first of all, the site of Newmarket is a site that would excite anybody that wants to train racehorses or wants to be associated with racing. So to me, it was a big eye-opener when I landed in Newmarket. And then from then, the discovery of British racecourses and the quality of the races and the quality of the horses that were trained in England. And that was really, I always put it like, if you're an opera singer, you want to sing a La Scala, but if you're a trainer, you want to train in England.
When it came to actually moving here, was it something you thought straight away, this is going to be home? Or was there a time when you thought perhaps it'll only be for a few years or so?
Well, I didn't know. When I started training, I thought I'll give it a go, and worst comes to the worst, I can always go back to Italy. And I was lucky enough to have enough good horses to keep my name in light and to be able to forge a career in England.
What were you like at that stage? Were you extremely, when you were young, in 1976, when you took out the trainer's licence, were you just hungry for everything? Whatever the success would be, you were just desperate to win races and train good horses?
I was probably very obnoxious, but I just wanted to win races. I wanted to do what I wanted to make a name for myself in England and be able to say that I didn't have to go back to Italy.
How quickly did you find Newmarket home? Because I read also that obviously Newmarket has been a huge part of your life, and from 1976 you trained there, and you said back in those days a big string perhaps would have been 50 or 60 horses, which compared to nowadays is a totally different kettle of fish in terms of the scale, the numbers, the way that it's driven now as a business.
Oh, totally. When I started working for Henry, he had probably 50, 60 horses. and he was, together with Robert Armstrong at the time, he was the largest ring in Newmarket. And it was different. Yes, there were probably only 800 horses trained in Newmarket at the time, and now we're up to, I think it's 2,000. So it grew over the years. Everybody, it was a different setup. I mean, totally different. Trainers in those days were what you may call gentleman trainers. They had an easier life, if you like, with fewer horses. And it wasn't until really Henry and subsequently Michael Stout that added a lot of professionalism through their hard work, that they showed everybody that you can train many more horses than 60, and with great success.
And when you started out in 1976, how many horses was it that you began with, Luca?
I think it was about 12. And they were nearly all, bar one, I think, were owned by Italian owners and friends of mine, or people that trained with my father. And so I'm very grateful to them, because without their support, I couldn't have started training for sure.
We are going to look back at some of the horses that you've picked out, and it's only right, really, that you've picked out horses here in England. Of course, a couple of Derby winners. You've picked out horses across the other side of the Atlantic, over stateside as well. You've picked out horses in Dubai. You were an international globetrotting trainer. Is that something that you're particularly proud of when you look back, Luca?
Yes, very much so. I've always maintained that to take racing to the next level, we need to globalize, or be, globalize is a bad word nowadays, but we need to be international. If you look at what's happened in motor racing, in tennis, in golf, there used to be tournaments held in their own countries, and it wasn't until it went to the world stage with series of tournaments around the world that they became very big sports. And I think the same applies to England. The more we can expand and race in different countries and create an interest for racing in many different countries around the world, we won't be a global sport.
Well, it's only right that we get the ball rolling with a very international race. We go back to 1983, the first of the 7 horses for Luca Cumani, Ptolomeo in the Arlington Million.
Nijinsky's Secret has the lead. John Henry on the outside is next. The mare Hush Deer is third, and Ptolomeo. They approach the furlong pole. Nijinsky's Secret, there's Ptolomeo on the inside. John Henry on the outside, 3 of them across the course. Final 16th, Ptolomeo on the inside, and John Henry at the wire. Ptolomeo wins it. It's Ptolomeo, John Henry next, Nijinsky's Secret right there. Running time on the board, 2:04.
Ptolomeo winning the Arlington Million and of course making history, the first British horse to do so back in 1983. How special and how vivid a memory is that still, Luca?
Well, very much so, because it was an enterprise born more out of juvenile enthusiasm than any wisdom. It's not something I think I would do again, or I would have done again in years gone by, because he was a 3-year-old. We'd been frustrated a bit with him because he was second in the Guineas, second in the St James Palace, second in the Sussex, and somehow, I don't know why, probably purely because of my wanderlust, I decided that the racing, the Arlington Million was a nice race to target. So we went over there with him, and there's a few anecdotes and funny stories about it. I remember when he did his blowout 2 days before the race, and in America they have the clockers, the people that sort of have their only job is to sit by the trackside in the morning and take down the time of the horses when they work. And I remember Ptolomeo going very, very well that morning, and he did 4 furlongs in 48. And the next morning, I saw printed in the daily racing form that he'd gone 4 furlongs in 50 and change. I thought that's rather strange, because it was officially given as 48. So I went and asked one of the clockers why is he down for 50 plus instead of 48. he said, "Oh, gee, European horses can't go that fast, can they?" And so they put him down as 50. And the other funny story was in the post-race interview with the journalists, a very nice, good-looking lady from I forget what paper said to me, "I understand you keep your horses on paper bedding." And I said yes. And she said, "Is that newspapers?" I said yes. "And what kind of newspaper do you use?" I said, "Well, it's always been the Daily Mail or the Mirror or whatever. Nowadays, today after today, that is one all this money. It'd probably be the Financial Times."
He's beaten the 8-year-old, the legendary John Henry in the process. Super ride as well. Goes down in history. It was, at the time, the richest turf race in the world. But in terms of getting the name Luca Cumani, I read this somewhere, the name Luca Cumani up in lights in another continent. How significant a race was that for you, for what would follow, for making people aware of who you were and what you could do?
Well, it was very significant because it could show that I, at the time, still being young, I could travel across the ocean with a nice horse and win a very big race. And also it was very significant because the chairman of Arlington Park was Dick Duchossois, and he started sending me horses after that. And I had some very good horses for him over the years. So it helped me a lot. It was great help.
And that's 1983, so 7 years after you took out the licence. How had things been going in that 7 years, Luca?
Not bad. We had a sort of, well, good and bad. We weren't winning a lot of races, but if you think that my first ever winner was in the Duke of York at York May meeting, so not many people can say that their first winner was in a group race. And at the same time, in my first year, I had the second in the 1,000 guineas. In my second year, I had the second and third in the Oaks. So we were missing the target, but we weren't too far away.
About the Arlington Million, you said in the years after you need a horse with the tough constitution, with that real turn of speed, which we saw the horse slip up the inside there. It's a race that you went back to try and win again. Is it a race that you fell in love with that day, the Arlington Million?
Well, I don't have love affair with races. I prefer to have those with girls. But I just thought that it was a nice race. I was familiar with the place. If I had another horse to go and do it, I would. And unfortunately, I didn't have another one to go and win it. But we went back a few years and we had good times.
And for 1983, of course, talking about going back to it, the first horse to go there and win from Britain, would it have raised eyebrows among your training colleagues that you were going over there to try and plunder a huge prize from way across the Atlantic?
I suspect quite a lot of eyebrows were raised before, and I suspect there was a bit of envy afterwards.
And when it came to actually winning the race, what was because you've won races, as I mentioned, in the USA, as far as out in Dubai, Japan, etc. What's the experience of winning a race like that in terms of the culture and the way that it was received over there at the time?
Well, the Americans were in shock, obviously, because John Henry, I think, probably was odds on, and he was the hero of American racing at the time. So it was a bit of a shock to them. But I just love. Look, I love winning races. Oh, I did, because I can't nowadays anymore. But I did love winning races, whatever they were. Whether it could have been a small racetrack in England or a big one abroad. Obviously, a big one abroad gives you that much more exposure and satisfaction. But as a trainer, I think most trainers would say the same. The important thing is to win with whatever horse you get given, whether it's a low-class horse or a top-class horse.
Well, one horse who was top-class and knew how to win big races was Comanche Run, and this is his second appearance in this series.
Comanche Run. Leicester really squeezing now, and he's finding an extra gear, but here up on the outside comes Oh So Sharp. Triptyque not done with, just over one to race this Comanche Run from Oh So Sharp. Comanche Run, Oh So Sharp, and Triptyque back in third, and Steve Cawthon's going for everything on Oh So Sharp, but at this stage Leicester has his measure on Comanche Run, and Comanche Run picking up, and so too is Oh So Sharp. Comanche Run's going to win it. A brilliant piece of riding by Leicester Figure. Comanche Run the winner, Oh So Sharp second, then back in third came Triptyque, then came Supreme Leader, followed home by Palace Music, who never really got into the race.
I said the second appearance in this series because Steve Mellish put forward Comanche Run in the Gordon Stakes the year before in his classic year, and what a significant horse that was, and a race for him as regards the way he went with his career. We'll talk about that in a minute, the Benston Hedges Gold Cup, now the Juddmonte International, but a year prior to that he'd given you that classic, Lester Piggott's 28th as well in the St Ledger. How significant a year would it have been to have that first classic for you in 1984?
Very, very significant, because classics is what everybody wants to win. If you ask any trainer, what's your priority, which race would you most like to win, they will say Derby, and second, any classic. So it was very significant. And the Ledger nowadays is seen perhaps as a minor classic, but at the time it still had quite a lot of status and appeal. And no, we were lucky to have a horse as good as that to win it.
What was he like as a character? Obviously, as a racehorse, we saw how brilliant what he was. But what was he like as a horse?
He was always a very happy horse. He used to squeal and play around. Nothing nasty about him. He was a very cheap yearling. I believe, if I remember right, he only cost about 11,000 at the sales as a yearling, and he was very unfurnished to begin with, and that's probably why it took him a long time to come to the top. And it wasn't until Goodwood in the March Stakes that he showed us what he was capable of. He used to work better than he raced. And I think that was probably a bit of lack of confidence as well. He had more confidence in himself, in what he was able to do at home and the gallops. And he always tended to get a little bit lost and was a bit disappointing in his first few runs. Other than when they were at low level, when we started going higher level, it was a bit disappointing until Goodwood. And then he started flourishing. But the most amazing thing was how much speed he developed between 3 and 4. Because to come back from winning the Ledger and win the Benson Hedges as it was then, and the Phoenix Champion Stakes, which is nowadays the Irish Champion Stakes, both at a mile and a quarter, both against the best competition in Europe at the time, was quite amazing.
We're watching the Benston Hedges Gold Cup. Of course, you see Leicester and that tremendous association they forged after Goodwood and the Gordon Stakes the previous August. So, with what you said there about his transformation from 3 to 4, had you had to effectively reassess where you were going to go with the horse? Because you've got a horse who's capable over 1 mile and 6, and at some point you've realised, hang on a minute, this fella's got a lot of ability as a mile 2 horse, as a 10 furlong horse.
Yes, indeed. In the spring of his 4-year-old year, his work, which had always been pretty good, got even better, and he was very good quality work over 6-7 furlongs in the morning. So I thought we'll start off at 1 mile and a quarter, and if I'm wrong, we can always go longer later.
You were young and hungry, of course, and obviously driven for winners throughout the career, but would he have been one of those horses that just got you springing out of bed in the morning?
Luckily, I've always sprung out of bed, because if you're a trainer, that's what you got to do, and you get used to it at a very young age. But he was another milestone in my career. He was owned by Ivan Allen, who was a complete horseman. He was a top-class trainer in Hong Kong and in the Far East, and I was lucky in a way. Because there's a funny story about this, because at the time when Comanche Run was a 3-year-old, he used to be, my stable jockey was an American called Darrell McHarg, and top-class jockey, but obviously not quite as good as Leicester. how many people have been better than Leicester, hardly any. And Darrell was disqualified during Goodwood, and that's why Leicester rode him in the Gordon Stakes.
Yep.
And then it was Ivan that wanted Leicester to stay on the horse, and I opposed it purely out of loyalty, out of the fact that I didn't want the balance with the stable upset with taking the stable jockey off a horse and replacing it, because then it would create sort of unease and mutiny in the stable, if you like. And anyway, Ivan, quite rightly, being the owner, got his way. And the funny story was that Darrell was asked by the press what would he be doing on Ledger Day, and he said, "Oh, I'll probably be playing tennis." And on Ledger Day morning, it was raining very hard, and Leicester. The story is that Leicester was driving up with some friends, or with his driver, up to Doncaster, and it was pouring with rain, and he was reading about Darrell saying that he'd be playing tennis, and so his comment was, "You won't be doing that either, will you?"
I think that's quite a famous comment. But in terms of one of the biggest horses of your career, would Comanche Run be right up there in the shortlist? He's made the 7, but would he be one of the most significant horses you trained, particularly at that time?
Oh, definitely. These are all horses, and then, as you said before, I was lucky to have many others that sort of were milestones. You know, Ptolomeo was the one that got me on the card for a Group 1, the richest race in the world at the time. Comanche Run, my first classic winner. Look, I can only say I've been lucky to have them.
Well, talking of milestones, the first Derby winner wasn't too far away, 1988. His name, Hayati.
Just over 2 furlongs to go. Glacial Storm with a white cap. Kafar coming there strongly. Kayazi on the outside. Dayoud next to the rails. Great glowing behind them and making good ground. A furlong and a half to go in the most open Derby. As Glacial Storm with a white cap in the yellow colours. Kafar on the wide outside. Kayazi starts to run. They're inside the final furlong as Kayazi goes on from Glacial Storm back in second place. Glacial Storm really rallies, but it's Kayazi who's going to hold on. But up the line, Kayazi wins it. Glacial Storm second, Doyen third. Red Glow and Unlucky 4, Kafar 5. Then up for Wayne 6 and Cheristar 7. Then in 8th place.
What a day that must have been 32 years ago, and actually for the man aboard, we ought to mention him. He's had a decision to make recently, Ray Cochrane. That was to call time on being Frankie's agent after all that success together. He had a decision to make that day as well on the Derby ride, Luca. It was either one of your horses, the winner which he chose, Kayazi or Kefar. Was it quite a decision for him?
Well, it was a difficult decision, really, because Kayazi had won the Lingfield Derby trial and Kafar had won the Dante. And traditionally, the Dante is a stronger race than the Lingfield Derby trial. But in the yard, we all had a sneaking suspicion that Kayazi was going to be the better horse. And I remember Ray, when the two horses did their final gallop on the Linkins 10 days before the Derby, Ray didn't want to ride either. He said he'd come out and watch them, and they both worked very well. And Ray plumped for Kayazi quite rightly. Ray always was a very good judge.
Was there a bit of a factor, I think Ray mentioned as well, latterly, we'll come to your affection and emotion for the race, but he suggested he thought that the winner, Kayazi, would handle the preliminaries quite well. He thought he'd be that kind of horse. Yeah,
definitely. Kayazi was always laid back. He was a lovely looking individual. He was on the small side, and ideally you probably would have wanted him to be sort of 10-20% bigger. But he was beautifully put together, gorgeous looking horse with a fantastic head and a great mind, always calm and relaxed and always very willing to please.
So 12 years after you take out the trainer's licence, this is the race that you've been on record. This is the coveted race, the one you'd got the classic with the St Ledger. But does that change your life, winning the Derby as a trainer, Luca?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it is a life-changing experience because it basically validated my choice of staying in England. It validated my choice of career. or what to do with myself. And after winning the Derby that day, I thought to myself, well, I can go to my grave happy now. Nobody goes there happy, but fairly happy.
It doesn't half make you wistful for the Derby when we eventually get it, of course, in 2020, because it is one of the great occasions as well. Just in terms of you, since you've retired, 2018, which was 30 years after Chiasi won the Derby, would you be nostalgic enough to watch that race back, or is it something that you wouldn't revisit too often?
Funny enough, I don't really dwell much on the past. I never have done. I think that you always have to look forward to try and pretend that you're keeping young. And so I don't dwell too much. But when the memory comes back up, either because you see a clip of the race on television or somebody mentioned it or whatever, it just gives me pleasure and pride, a sense of pride most of all.
Well, I know that the next horse is going to give you an enormous sense of pleasure and pride to look back on and talk about into the 1990s, and the name is Barathea.
Running on now with just over 3 to go, and Fitzgeraldo virtually joined by Master Tribe, and they're a couple of lengths in front of Barathea on the stand side. Then Mysterious Ways, Petardi and Maciar with Ivory Frontier next. But it's Master Tribe and Fitzgeraldo, Barathea on the near side with Maciar improving. Running down now with just over a furlong to go, and Barathea comes up to join Master Tribe and Fitzgeraldo, making ground the outside. Maciar with Fatherland putting in a good run the near side, but it's Barathea now from Fatherland on the stand side of Maciar as they run up towards the finish. Barathea from Fatherland as they go towards the line. Barathea just from Fatherland. Maciar possibly third ahead of Fitzgeraldo, within Master Tribe with Via Parigi, Ivory Frontier, Nordic Fox, Mysterious Ways, Petardi.
He was the favourite in those distinctive colours, and he was victorious at the Curragh. Barathea we will talk about later in his career, but that was just after he'd finished second to the mighty Zaphonic at Newmarket in the Guineas. How did you summarise his 3-year-old career, Luca?
It was good, but luckless in a way. Zaphonic had to beat the course record in order to beat us. And at the time, I remember somebody telling me that we had set the course record as well by finishing second. We'd beaten the previous course record. So he had run an excellent race, a fantastic race, just that Zaphonic on that day was unbeatable.
Was he always a horse that showed you brilliance, Barathea? When was it that he first lit the spark and you thought, this is a very special horse?
We always knew from his 2-year-old career. I think he ran twice and won both times at Newmarket. And so he was always a promising horse. He was a big horse. He was a horse that tended to carry too much weight, and he was a sort of difficult horse to get fit,
right,
as such, because in the spring you want to get your horse fit for the Guineas, but at the same time you don't want to bottom him that early in the season. And I remember he worked with a horse of William Haggis before the Craven. And he didn't work particularly well, and at the end of the gallop he was sort of huffing and puffing and panting, and I can't remember what the name of William's horse was, but he was a good top class handicapper, who I believe perhaps won the handicap or something, and he looked at me, William, and he said in his typical sort of typical way, he said to me, "You want to try and get that horse fit, you know." And in fact, he wasn't fit when he ran in the Craven. I think he was only 4th in the Craven, but that put him right for the Guineas, and he ran as good a race as you could have hoped for by winning.
We will come to the Breeders' Cup, because that was the incredible end to the fairy tale for him and for you, and we'll talk about how it all came about. I know a lot of people will know the story, but it's interesting to listen to again. But there aren't that many horses, I can imagine off the top of my head at least, that have won a classic over a mile, run in a Guineas, ran in a Derby, and then ended up running in a July Cup as well, Luca.
That was all a little bit messy, I'm afraid. There were outside influences. And at the time, I remember that I was told that Sheikh Mohammed didn't have a runner in the Derby, and he very much liked to have one, and Barathea was possibly his best horse at the time. And so I was made to run him, basically, knowing full well that he wouldn't get the trip because he was a miler through and through. And so we ended up running there. And when after the race I pointed out that the horse didn't stay because it's got too much speed, somebody came up with the idea of the July Cup, because it'd been done before by the maestro Michael Stout. And so that's where we went. He ran well, admittedly. He ran, what was it, fourth in the July Cup? I can't remember, but he ran a good race, ran close. And then we gradually got back to a mile, and that's where he belonged. And he won. What did he win? He won the Queen Anne the following year, before winning the Breeders' Cup. Also, it was a bit of a transition period in the Dali stroke Sheikh Mohammed camp, with different jockeys coming and going, and I was never really quite happy. Not that they made any mistakes, but I was never quite happy that I couldn't get the continuity and the flow and the understanding between horse and rider that I was wishing for. And I was, again, as luck would have it, I wasn't told what jockey I had to use in the Breeders' Cup, and so I went for Frankie, and the rest is history.
A young Frankie Dettori who's still going strong over a quarter of a century later. But for you personally, that Breeders' Cup success, and he was brilliant, just watching the video back again earlier, of all the horses that you've taken across the world to the big races, is that one almost the master plan, the one that gives you the most satisfaction, given how well it went and the way you'd mapped it out, that you'd take him over early, that he'd train in a certain way back home, almost to give him the Churchill Downs experience?
Yeah, definitely. It was planned. It was planned very carefully, and I had at the time. Don't forget that Barathea was half owned by Gerald Lee, who bred him, and he was a great friend of mine and a great supporter. I had some really good horses for him over the years, and so it was. The build-up was all fantastic. I mean, I asked Peter Amos, who at the time was running Newmarket Estates, to build me a bend replica of the Churchill Down, because I noticed how horses, when they went to America on the tight turf tracks, they had trouble sort of adapting to the tight bends. So I thought if I can give him some practice of that might be a good idea. So we got the blueprint of the track at the Churchill Downs, and Peter very kindly built one. Well, put the rails in as per the design of Churchill Downs on what we call the Low Derby's ground. And we went round there and worked him round there a couple of times. And sure enough, when he came to the race, the horse knew what he was doing, and he cornered very well, extremely well. And
I'm right in saying he went out early by perhaps standards for when you'd take a horse out there. How much earlier was he out there to acclimatise to what he was going to be facing?
No, not particularly. I can't remember the exact details now, but I remember there were troubles about when to travel and so on and so forth. And I think that the plane that was set up for the European runners was leaving, I think it was on a Monday. And I thought I'd be better off, or the horse would be better off going earlier than that. And so I think we ended up going on a Friday.
Right.
It ended up being a little bit more expensive. We had to go via New York and change planes and then onto Louisville. I don't know whether that made a difference or not, but that's what I thought I'd better do with the horse.
Did you go over there, given all the planning and the ability that you knew the horse had, did you go over there confident, Luca?
All my career, I've always been very fond to say, my motto is, when it comes to horses and women, never confident, always hopeful.
As a reply, that's about as good as it gets. I know we'll talk about the jockey a little bit later, but we are talking about a young Frankie Dettori at this point. What was he, I don't know, 23, 24? What was he like at that stage, Luca?
Frankie's been the same ever since he was a 15-year-old. He came to me when he was 15, and he's always been bubbly, enthusiastic, smiley, full of life, and yeah, just the same. But the interesting story about that is that, as some people might know, that was the first time that Frankie did his flying dismount, and it all came about because in the winter, when he was a kid, in the winter I used to send him to America to spend time there and learn and refine his style. And he used to spend a lot of time with Angel Cordero, who was known as for his flying dismounts. And when Frankie came and rode Barathea the week before he was due to leave for America, and he worked extremely well. And on the way back from the gallops, he said to me, "You know what? I might do the flying dismount, the Cordero jump." And I said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I don't know. I really feel I'd like to do it." And so I said, "Well, let's try and win it first, and then we'll talk about it." And when I got down to the track after the race, and Frankie was already couldn't contain himself, and he said to me, "I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it." And I said, "Are you sure? What if you break your leg? Who cares? Who cares?" And he went in. And did it. And that's when he started doing his flying dismounts.
A quarter of a century on, and he's still flying, and he certainly perfected it over all those years. It's time to introduce the next horse, the second of the two Derby winners in the late 1990s. This was High Rise.
And still the rank outsider has the call in the Vodafone Derby, and it's Sunshine Street in the lead. City Honours with a run. Here on the outside, the yellow jacket, High Rise, sees daylight and Olivier Pellier. Could he claim his first Derby? He's come to pass City Honours. The outside is Sunshine Street, the rails. They're inside the final furlong. And it's the white cap City Honours, the yellow colours High Rise. And these two are the battlers as they race inside the last 150 yards. It's High Rise who's edging on, and High Rise City Honours fights back on the line, and it's High Rise City Honours 1 and 2, Border Arrow, Sunshine Street, and then came a great dance on the Glowworm, followed by Sadian in second.
So a decade after Kayazi, Luca, when winning the Derby, of course that was all the dreams come true, but to win it again, was it almost a different sensation second time round? Were you able to savour it a little bit more because you knew what to expect?
It was just as good. The first time was exciting because that's what you want to do, and the second time is equally exciting because you can sort of confirm that it wasn't a fluke first time.
Olivier Pellier, of course, on board 22 years ago. Just watching it back, I think I heard you say once, were you a little bit worried he was a bit far back at one stage and he had way too much to do, and then suddenly you thought, oh, we might be placed, we might be second, and then, hang on a minute, we're going to win this?
I remember very clearly on the bend, thinking to myself how stupid I'd been in my school days, never had to have learned French, because I thought that I didn't make it quite clear that I didn't want to be that far back and I wanted to be closer. And yes, I was sort of cursing the fact that I obviously hadn't explained myself well enough. And coming into the straight, I thought, well, he's still going well. Maybe we get into fourth, maybe we get into third, maybe we get into second. Good grief, we've won it.
The story was the Guineas winner, the filly was in there, wasn't she? Cape Verde, the filly going up against the Colts in the Derby. But I think I'm right in saying that your horse, who also like Kayazi went via Lingfield, I think he was the only unbeaten horse in the whole race, and yet he still goes off a 20-1 shot. You weren't necessarily one of the focus horses going into the race, Luca.
No, but I never was a fashionable trainer.
What kind of a horse was he, High Rise, when you reflect on him?
He was a strange horse because he wasn't a very consistent horse in the morning in his gallops, and that's why we never went to the Irish Derby afterwards, because he just wasn't pleasing me. He had his moments. He was sort of coming in and out of form and in and out of well-being and in and out. You could almost just looking at him see when he wasn't at his best, and then sure enough a few days later or whatever he would give all the right vibes again. And other than that, he was a nice character. He didn't do anything wrong. He behaved. You'd have him as a friend. You wouldn't begrudge him anything if you had him as your best friend.
And for you, this is 10 years after Kayazi, so obviously your children are a bit older. Was this something very much that you could share with the whole family, a day like that, Luca?
Yes, I think so. I think the children were probably at school at the time, and I don't think either of them were there. And at the time, they were still a little bit young. Matty hadn't shown a great interest in racing at the time. They're both very good riders, but Matt hadn't shown a great interest in being a trainer or being with the horses all the time. And Francesco was still quite young.
Do you have a favourite of the two, Kayazi or High Rise, or are they both special, being Derby winners in their own right, Luca?
For a horrible moment, I thought you were going to ask me if I had a favourite between Matt and Chester. Luckily, you didn't.
That's the next question, Luca. We won't be doing that until right at the end of the programme.
Listen, I never had favourites. To me, all the horses were the same. I always viewed myself as the head of a school, and all the pupils are there for me to make them into as good people as I possibly can, and try not to have favourites. Obviously, subconsciously, the horse that wins you most probably becomes a favourite, but we used to treat them all the same, and we used to look after them with affection in the same way.
Right, this fella, the next horse that we introduce as we move on into the new millennium, he could have a whole hour to himself. He was Falbrav.
Passing the half mile, and Izdiham is now being joined almost by his stablemate Naef. Naef bridges that gap. Then Mingan is third. Falbrav travels well on their heels. Calaman out wide, now being scrubbed along, followed by Norse Dancer, and then Magistrati on the far side, and Indian Creek. Izdiham has gone, but now Falbrav takes on Naef, and Falbrav, as at Sandown, is too quick for Naef at this stage, inside the final quarter, and Falbrav really quickened up there. Naef, no response. Magistrati is next. Mingan. Calaman can't get there. Indian Creek is running on well, but they have to go to catch Falbrav inside the final furlong. He's 4 lengths clear. Magistrati stays on well. Falbrav, too classy. It's Falbrav will win the Jutmont International. Magistrati in second. Naef third. Then Mingan, followed home by Indian Creek. Next was North.
Well, Luca, I think you only had him for the year 2003, but he packed a lot in, and wow, that achievement, that whole year from April through till December. Does the name Falbrav just make you smile a bit now, Luca?
Oh, definitely. You asked me earlier if I had a favourite. If I have to say, I'd probably say Falbrav was my favourite horse of my career. I wouldn't have wanted him as a friend. He was a bully. He didn't like people. He would squeeze you against the wall in his box. He'd bite you, he'd kick you, he'd do all sorts of things. But when it comes to raw ability and beautiful, strong horse, you'd have to say he was the best.
Well, that's the thing. I'm sure you've seen enough horses, and if they're going to bite and kick, you don't mind so much if they come back and win 5 Group 1s, do you?
I do mind, yes. I do mind quite.
So tell us about the journey with him from the Prix-Gannet in April until what he did in the Far East come December. What were the circumstances why he raced for you, to anyone who doesn't know?
He was trained in Italy. He was the best horse in training in Italy, and he probably was the best horse to come out of Italy since Reader. And he won the Japan Cup for his Italian trainer, and he was lucky actually, because that year the Japan Cup was run at a mile and 3 furlongs, and it wasn't run in Tokyo. It was run at a different track, still in Tokyo. I think it's called Nakayama. And because of the configuration of the track, it was a furlong shorter. Had it been a mile and a half, he wouldn't have won it, because the second horse was closing very fast on him, and I think he only won by a head. Anyway, I don't know the ins and outs, but his owner and his trainer had a fallout the following January, February, and I was rang up out of the blue, asked whether I would take this horse. I knew the owner because I already had some horses for him in Newmarket, and so he asked me if I would take him, and obviously I jumped to it. I said, well, with great pleasure. And I had a bit of a worrying first month, because when he first came in, we were just cantering just to build him up to fast work up Warren Hill. He used to get halfway up the hill and spit the bridle out and showed nothing. He didn't seem to have a particularly good stride. He didn't seem to have anything to make him a good horse. But the first time we went over to racecourse side and worked him, you could see immediately, because he changed gear when asked. He changed gear and went past his galloping companions in 2 strides and went clear. And then we knew we had a good horse in our hand. And he was such a strong horse, and strong mentally, and strong physically. He never left a note. He never was sick. He's never sorry. And he, as I said, he had 10 races at, I think it was 9 at, 8 or 9 at Group 1 level between April and December. And I think that possibly his last was even his best in December in the Hong Kong Cup. He never missed a dance. He always worked well. You just have to be careful not to go. He regarded very much his box as his own domain, and he was very keen on maintaining his privacy and wasn't prepared to share anything with you. That's why I said earlier, he probably wouldn't have been a very good friend.
Well, interesting, when you mentioned his physicality, when he won at Shartin that December, you said it was almost like watching Seabiscuit, and he looked like Muhammad Ali when he was strutting around the parade ring.
He was. He as I said, he was the epitome of the complete athlete. You just couldn't take your eyes off him when you saw him.
For all that there were the 5 Group 1s, you were on record as well after his career had ended saying he won the 5, it should have been 6, it might have been 7. There were, of course, a agonising couple of near misses, and one, of course, over in America does spring to mind. I don't need to remind you, of course, the one with Jahar and High Chaparral. I mean, it's a hell of a race to watch back, but for you personally, is it difficult to watch back?
Yes, very much, because I don't want to blame anybody, but I mean, it's probably just my fault, because I said to Darrell Holland, I was riding him, I said, ride him like you normally do. And the way Darrell used to ride him was to put the race to bed 2 out. He just used to just go for it, 2 out, put the race to bed, get 2 or 3 lengths on his opponents, and then that was it. And I should have been more careful, and I should have said, look, you know, we're going a mile and a half. It's the first time we're going a mile and a half. Let's just be a little bit more careful and a little bit more thoughtful about it. But somehow he got lost, and Darrell kicked 2 out on the crown or just coming out of the bend, and he went probably 2, maybe even 3 lengths clear, and he looked like winning all the way up the straight. He was just looking like the winner. And then 50 yards out, he started shortening, and 20 yards out, he basically died, and he went from first to third, just beaten a neck in total. But, you know, he literally died on his feet in his last 20, 30 yards.
So, but for that disappointment, there was an awful lot to celebrate and look back on. We saw York, the Juddmonte International of that year, and we've talked about Hong Kong. What was the defining day? What was the best day, Luca, with him?
Probably the eclipse, because we are going into the eclipse from having got a drubbing in the Prince of Wales. He didn't run any sort of a race that day somehow. He again changed of jockey. It was Demuro who rode him. It was a good jockey, good Italian jockey who's doing very well in Japan. But you know, he didn't know the horse particularly well. It didn't have him positioned particularly well, and it just didn't work out. He probably wouldn't have worked out with any other jockey, and it probably was a bad piece of training. Who knows? But it was disappointing. And to come back from that 2-3 weeks later in the eclipse and and win as authoritatively as he did was a big relief and a big joy for me.
The final horse in the list, the last of the Magnificent Seven, who had plenty of stamps in his passport. His name was Presvis.
Royal Bench and Presvis last as the field packs, coming onto the bend in the Dubai Duty Free, and Beauty Flash is about to be joined by the grey mare. Strawberry Daiquiri has strode up on the outside. Debussy and Bankable behind them. River Jetes trying to work into the clear. Tarsi's holding her in a pocket. She's out now. Strawberry Daiquiri in front at the 300. River Jetes on the outside. Beauty Flash the inside, and here he comes. Presvis has come from last. He's come through the middle. River Jetes in front. Presvis goes after the mare. Presvis hits the lead. River Jetes fights back. Presvis in front, and he's finally done it. Presvis has won the Duty Free. He's beaten River Jetes. Photo third. Wigmore.
Weaving through Presvis to win in Dubai back in 2011 under Ryan Moore. My favourite quote, just about, apart from the ones that you've delivered throughout the show so far, Luca, and you described him, I think when we sadly lost him, you described him as my air miles partner. Does that just about sum him up, Luca?
Definitely, very much so, because I think he went to Dubai every winter. He came back with a lot of money every time. And he also went to Japan, and he also went to Singapore, each time collecting some money. So he was a gorgeous horse to have around.
That's the thing. I think when he retired back in, well, just after that, after 2011 or so, we hadn't seen him in Britain for a couple of years, despite a horse being trained in the UK. For British terms, I think his record of £4.5 million in career earnings was right up there, the records, if it isn't still today. I will stand corrected, but he was some cash cow, wasn't he?
Oh, definitely. No, I think he's lost that record with, I think Red Caddo holds that record now, if I'm not mistaken, and then probably another 2 or 3, because the prize money of these big races around the world has gone up sharply in the last few years. But at the time, it was a record, and it was great. The reason why we never saw him or hardly saw him in England is because he was probably the most difficult horse to train. He had soundness issues when he was young. That's why he didn't run through. His first race was as a 4-year-old, and thank God, because thank God I was made to sell him, because can you imagine owners wanting to keep a horse unraced till the age of 4? But he kept running into injuries, and I think that we probably had him entered for a horse in training sales, and basically, well, almost ready to throw him away, so to speak. And luckily we didn't. And then he started in England, and he at the time he was still behaving. Although again he was difficult character. We had to geld him, because I remember in the winter between 3 and 4, he nearly savaged my assistant trainer, Charlie Henson, who used to ride him. He sort of got him on the ground and was biting him and kneeling on him and doing all sorts of nasty things. And so that's when we gelded him. And that, for a while, taught him a lesson. But then after I came back from Dubai as a 5-year-old, he started being very difficult about exercising to the schedule that we had actually set out for him. So he would refuse to go up certain canters, or he would stand at the bottom of the canter for a long time before deciding that he would go up it. He would refuse to go up some gallops. And that's why in the end, we gave up the idea of racing him in England, because we just basically couldn't quite train him. And it was easier abroad, because you always train on the track, and you go round and round in circles, and that possibly confuse him a little bit. And if you chose to jump off in different parts of the track every day, you got away with it. He would do that because there was some novelty in it, and he didn't really know where the start of the canter or the gallop was. But even so, he was difficult then. I remember his last gallop before winning the duty free. Ryan was out there and came to ride him. And the idea was to jump from the 7 and work 7 furlongs to the winning post. Well, he sort of hacked down to the 7, and the 7 went by, and he was still hacking, and Ryan was flapping about, but couldn't get him to do any more than hacking. And then he went past the 6, and he went past the 5, still hacking, and then the 4, and he just carried on. He went a whole circuit just hacking, with Ryan trying to get him going, and he wouldn't. And then all of a sudden, click, he went, and so Ryan counted the 7 furlongs from where he started, and he worked very well. He did a very good time, and he worked very well. So he was tricky. Yeah.
Does he?
He was a difficult horse to train, but he gave me great satisfaction.
That's the thing. We've got to the last horse in the list, and we're going to talk about a couple of, a trainer and a jockey who you've enjoyed being as part of your life. But to finish with him, given that the last couple of years he was just the international horse, and Falbrav as well, the places he took you to, are they just about the two that summarise it from a global perspective for you, to round it off to where we were beginning to talk about anyway? The fact that we started talking about what you were as a globe-trotting, trailblazing trainer, and horses like Falbrav and Presvis did exactly that for you.
Yes, and as I said earlier, I've always been a believer in the international competition. I think that that's the best way to showcase our sport, by matching the best horses with the best horses on a global scale. And so I was lucky. I had some very good horses to go and win these races, and I think we probably still have the record of winning group races in 13 different racing countries in the world. So that's good. Something to be proud of, and something to go to the grave happy, if you can be happy.
For the second time in this show, I think there's plenty to be happy about, Luca. Time to talk about a couple of people who've been part of your racing life, starting with a training colleague, a training rival as well, Sir Michael Stoute, who, when you retired in October 2018, only this man and, of course, Sir Mark Prescott had been longer-serving trainers in Newmarket. They, of course, continue. So your rivalry, your friendship and, of course, your camaraderie with Sir Michael will go back quite a long way, Luca.
A very long way. I'm not sure why, but we became friends very, very early on, when he was probably in his 3rd or 4th year training and I was in my 1st. And then we've had we always got on extremely well. We spent some time on holiday together. Mm-hmm. And I remember his kindness also. In the mid-80s, he had a very good American owner called John Maybe, and he was a big owner in America with lots of good horses, and used to send him a bunch of 2-year-olds every year. And one year he said to me, "Look, I'm getting too many from him and I haven't got room. Would you take some?" And I thought, yeah, of course I will. I had room, so I said, yes, of course I will. And out of that bunch that came, I think we got 3 perhaps. And there was a very good horse called Half a Year that won the St. James Palace for us. So I never forgot that act of kindness. And funnily enough, I don't think he had a good horse in the ones he kept. Just the way the cookie crumbles, you know. If we all could tell by looking at a horse when he's young which one is going to be good, we'd be all extremely, extremely rich and probably big-headed.
We have already mentioned the jockey. We're into the final minute, unfortunately, Luca. So, I mean, you could talk for ages, I'm sure, about Frankie Dettori, but it's gone back a long way, the relationship, right from his teenage days. Just summarise very quickly for us, if you will, your relationship with Frankie.
It was fantastic, absolutely fantastic for the first, probably, what was it, 8 years or so. And it wasn't until we fell out when he wanted to go to Hong Kong, because I disagreed so furious I was that he was chucking such a promising young career to go to Hong Kong. And I made it clear to him in probably too strong terms. I was probably too strong, and I think I probably kicked him up the arse as well.
Luca, I think that's it. I'm afraid we've got to the end of the show. I've got to cut you off mid-flow. I apologise for that, but many thanks for your time. This has been fantastic to take a look back. and stay safe. We'll be racing again very soon. Thank you for watching My Racing Life with Luca Cumani, who starred as our guest today.